Flight 777, the Phantom Plane. It was a foggy October evening when Flight 777 was scheduled to take off from Heathrow Airport, bound for New York. Among the passengers was Sarah, a travel journalist known for her fearless adventures. This flight, however, was different. From the moment she boarded, she felt something was wrong. As she walked down the aisle, she noticed the plane was eerily quiet. The passengers, though present, seemed distant. Their faces were pale, eyes hollow, and no one spoke a word. A shiver ran down her spine as she took her seat near the window. Looking outside, the thick fog seemed unnatural, swirling around the plane like it was alive. The flight took off smoothly, but the uneasiness in Sarah's stomach grew. An hour into the journey, the lights flickered. The cabin crew, all dressed in outdated uniforms, moved silently up and down the aisle. Sarah pressed the button for a flight attendant. A woman appeared, her face expressionless. "Can I help you?" the flight attendant asked, her voice cold. Sarah hesitated, suddenly unsure of her question. "What year is this plane from? Your uniforms, they seem old?" The attendant smiled, a tight, unsettling grin. "Everything is just as it should be, miss." Sarah's heart pounded as the attendant turned and walked away. She glanced at the other passengers, who were still silent, staring ahead like statues. No one seemed alarmed by the flickering lights or the strange crew. It felt like she was the only one alive in a plane full of ghosts. Suddenly, the plane jerked violently. The captain's voice crackled over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are experiencing some turbulence. Please remain seated." But it wasn't turbulence. Sarah looked out the window and gasped. The fog outside had thickened, completely engulfing the plane. Shapes, dark, shadowy figures, moved within it, circling the aircraft like vultures. Her heart raced as the temperature in the cabin plummeted. Breath visible in the cold air, she grabbed her phone to check the time, but it showed an error. No time zone available? Panic gripped her as she realized they were no longer in normal airspace. Suddenly the plane began to descend, the nose dipping downward as the lights flickered again. Sarah's seatbelt snapped tight, pinning her to her chair. The other passengers remained calm, not reacting to the sudden drop. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. The plane leveled off after a few moments of pure terror. But something had changed. The air smelled different, stale and heavy, as if they had descended into a different time or place. Sarah's eyes darted across the cabin, but no one else seemed to notice. She leaned forward to ask the person seated in front of her if they were feeling the same strange pressure in the air. But when she tapped their shoulder, the figure slumped over, lifeless. Sarah gasped, but before she could call for help, the figure slowly turned its head. Its skin was sallow, eyes sunken deep into its skull. The passenger's lips parted in a ghastly smile, but no words came out. Sarah recoiled in horror, pressing herself into her seat. Desperately, she looked around the cabin, searching for some sign of normality, but everything had shifted. The passengers were no longer still. They were moving, but unnaturally so, twisting, jerking, some turning their heads completely around, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. One by one, they began whispering something, too soft for Sarah to understand. The sound grew, a cacophony of disjointed murmurs. She clutched her armrests, her nails digging into the fabric as the whispers turned into low, guttural chants. It felt as though the plane itself was chanting along with them. Sarah shut her eyes, trying to block out the sound. But just then, she felt cold fingers brush against her neck. She jerked around, but no one was there. The air had grown even colder, frost forming on the windows and creeping along the walls of the plane. The passengers' breaths puffed out invisible clouds, yet their faces remained indifferent, as if they weren't feeling the cold. Suddenly, there was a loud bang from the cockpit. Sarah unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, adrenaline pushing her forward. She needed to find the pilot. She needed to know where they were going, what was happening. She staggered down the aisle, the plane shaking as if it were alive. As she neared the front, a flight attendant blocked her path. "You can't go in there," the attendant said, her smile unnerving, eyes glowing faintly. Sarah pushed past her, ignoring the chill running down her spine. She burst into the cockpit, but what she saw froze her in place. The pilot and co-pilot were both skeletons, their bones draped in rotting uniforms, yet their hands moved on the controls, guiding the plane through the dense fog. The controls themselves were outdated, the dashboard rusted, as though it had been stuck in time for decades. "Welcome to Flight 777, where time is endless and passengers are eternal," said a deep voice behind her. Sarah spun around to find the captain standing in the doorway, his face pale, eyes glowing just like the rest of the crew. His smile was haunting, his figure towering over her as he stepped forward. She tried to back away, but her legs wouldn't move. "This flight never ends, Sarah," the captain whispered. "It's always flying, always collecting souls like yours. You've joined the others now." The plane plunged into the fog, and Sarah felt weightless, as if they were falling into an abyss. The fog pressed against the windows, and the shadowy figures outside grew clearer. They were passengers who had flown this same flight decades ago, lost in an unending loop between life and death. She looked down at her phone again, its screen glitching. A message flashed across it. Flight 777 disappeared, 1963. All souls lost. Sarah's blood ran cold. This wasn't a normal flight. It was the final journey of a cursed plane, eternally flying between dimensions, collecting the souls of anyone unfortunate enough to board. She fought against the seatbelt, desperate to escape, but it was too late. The shadows seeped through the walls of the plane, moving toward her. The last thing she heard was the voice of the captain, calm and emotionless. "Enjoy your stay, miss, forever." As the fog swallowed the plane whole, Flight 777 vanished once again, lost to time, its passengers doomed to relive the nightmare for eternity. And Sarah, like those before her, became just another ghost on the phantom plane.